My name is Ava Morgan, and I was 31 years old the day my father removed me from my own life with a single voicemail. No meeting, no warning, no confrontation, just his cold voice through my phone speaker at 10:12 p.m. like a system error notification. "You're out of Morgan Developments. Don't call back." That was it. For a moment, I just stared at the screen blinking. The corners of my mouth twitched, confused, like maybe I'd misheard, like maybe this was some kind of mistake, a prank, a message meant for someone else. But it wasn't. My name was there. My father's number. My world shut down with 12 words. I didn't call back. I didn't scream, cry, or ask why. I replied with one word. Understood. Then I put my phone face down on the kitchen counter of my tiny one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, the same apartment I'd barely slept in for the past 3 years, because I was always at the office working, fixing, cleaning up other people's messes, making sure things didn't fall apart. The silence in that moment was louder than the busiest Manhattan street. No phones ringing, no urgent emails, no late-night calls from legal, just absence. My identity erased like I never mattered. And maybe I never really did. 2 months earlier, I had been leading the quarterly financial review for Morgan Developments, my family's real estate empire, running the numbers, navigating investors, plugging holes in my younger brother Ethan's disastrous budgeting. My title was Executive Director of Finance, but let's be honest, I was the parachute under every failed idea, the back-end fix for every reckless decision, especially Ethan's. And now I wasn't even worth a phone call. That same morning, while I was still staring at my silent phone, Ethan was promoted. Charles Morgan, our father, the founder, the face of the company, had named him Chief Financial Officer, the title I'd earned, the one I was told I wasn't ready for year after year. Ethan didn't call me either. Instead, I got a text from my mother. "Hope you understand. It's for the best. Focus on yourself." I reread it 5 times, each word hitting me like ice. For the best. For who? Because from where I was standing, I had given them everything. Weekends, vacations, birthdays, relationships, my 20s, and in return I got cut out like a miscalculation in a spreadsheet. But I didn't cry. Not then. Something inside me, something heavy, just went still. Because what they didn't know was that I had kept everything. Every report, every red flag, every under-the-table transfer Ethan thought no one would catch, every investor pitch I rewrote behind the scenes, not for revenge, just in case. And now, just in case had arrived. I used to think being the quiet one in the family made me safe. Invisible, maybe, but safe. While Ethan showed up to board meetings late and loud, charming his way through incompetence, I sat in the corner of the conference room, taking notes, catching inconsistencies, memorizing balance sheets. I didn't need the spotlight. I just wanted respect. I thought if I worked hard enough long enough, I'd earn it. But respect was never the currency in my family. Ego was, and Ethan had plenty of it. Every photo of our family office had him front and center, handshake shots, ribbon cuttings, magazine covers with bold headlines like "The Future of Morgan Developments." Meanwhile, I was cropped out or blurred in the background or not there at all because I was too busy behind the scenes trying to prevent the company from collapsing under his recklessness. My father, Charles Morgan, liked his legacy clean and photogenic. Ethan fit the mold. I didn't. At home, nothing was different. Our family dinners felt more like press briefings, scripted, rehearsed, performance-based. Ethan would go on about some flashy new condo project or influencer partnership, and my dad would beam with pride. I once tried to talk about a major cost savings initiative I'd implemented that saved us nearly $400K annually. My mother nodded absently. My dad cut me off halfway through and asked Ethan if he'd golfed with that Miami developer yet. That's how it always was. I was the numbers. Ethan was the face, and my mother, Diane Morgan, believed in peace at any cost. She was the kind of woman who'd walk around a burning house as long as the curtains were drawn and the floors stayed polished. She never raised her voice. She never took sides. But her silence always leaned toward my father and brother, and I knew exactly where I stood. Even when things got tense between me and Dad, especially over the shady condo development deal in Queens, I tried to believe that reason would win. I disagreed with his push to move forward without transparency, and I said so. Calmly, professionally. He didn't like it. A week later, my responsibilities were restructured. A month later, I was removed from the leadership WhatsApp group. And 2 months later, I got the voicemail. No confrontation, no explanation, just erasure. That night, I pulled out the drawer in my desk at home, the one I kept locked. Inside were 2 USB drives and a small leather-bound notebook. Years of notes, digital copies of every financial discrepancy I'd ever fixed, every deal that wasn't logged properly, every transaction that was cleaned quietly, a few of them signed by Ethan, a couple initialed by Charles. I wasn't holding a weapon. I was holding proof. I stared at them for a long time, not knowing whether I felt heartbroken or foolish, or maybe both. They hadn't just removed me from the company, they'd erased me from the family. But if they could rewrite the narrative, so could I. And unlike them, I didn't need a boardroom or a title to do it. People used to ask me what it was like growing up in a wealthy family. I'd smile and say busy. What I never said out loud was this: I was born into a business, not a home. Even before I had a title, I had responsibilities. By the time I was 16, I was proofreading investor reports for typos. By 22, I was reconciling financial statements in spreadsheets Ethan didn't know how to open. And by 27, I was quietly fixing million-dollar mistakes he made while he partied in Miami or played golf with developers he barely understood. I was never officially told to clean up after him. It just became my role. The fixer, the ghost in the machine. I used to think it was temporary, just until I earned my place. That if I put in more hours, stayed quiet, proved myself useful enough, I'd finally be recognized as an equal. I didn't want a trophy or a plaque. I just wanted to stop being invisible. So I said yes. To everything. I said yes when Dad asked me to take over Ethan's portion of the quarterly financial projections after he missed the deadline again. I said yes when legal called at 11:47 p.m. on a Sunday to reformat a pitch deck that Ethan had accidentally submitted with missing disclosures. I said yes when my own birthday dinner was canceled because Dad decided to fly to Boston last minute and needed me to book a hotel suite and finalize the site proposal while he was in the air. I said yes even when I wanted to scream. That kind of saying yes doesn't feel like sacrifice at first. It feels like proving yourself, like loyalty, like love, until it doesn't. Until you realize the love was conditional. The loyalty was one-sided. The work was expected, not appreciated. There was one week I'll never forget. We were closing on a major commercial property in Midtown. It was Ethan's deal on paper, but in reality, he'd fumbled every stage. The investor group threatened to pull out the zoning paperwork had errors, and the pro forma model he presented was frankly a joke. I stayed up 3 nights in a row, fixing it, running fresh projections, redrafting the contracts, personally calling the city to re-verify permits. We saved the deal. Ethan got quoted in the real deal. Dad took him to a Yankees game. I got silence. No thank you, no acknowledgement, not even an email. Later that week, I heard Dad say to someone at a board lunch, Ethan's really coming into his own. Proud of that kid. I stood 3 feet away holding my notes. There was something about that moment so small, so normal, that cracked something inside me. Not because I wanted the praise, but because I realized I could save the company 10 times over, and it would still never be mine. I was valuable, but only in the shadows. And when I finally dared to step into the light and challenge something unethical, they didn't hesitate to throw me out. That's when it really hit me. I didn't belong in the family business. I belonged beneath it. And that wasn't loyalty anymore. It was self-betrayal. My friends used to joke that I had a relationship with my Outlook calendar, that it was the only thing I ever made time for. They weren't wrong. In the 3 years before I got that voicemail, I canceled 6 vacations, missed 4 birthdays, and rescheduled every date night I ever planned with someone I cared about. I once stood up my boyfriend at the time, someone genuinely kind, on the night he was going to propose. He didn't say it outright, but I saw the little ring box in his jacket pocket weeks later when he moved out. He didn't even take it with him, just left it in the drawer by my coffee mugs, like some silent postscript. He wrote me a note. It said, "I love you, Ava, But I'm tired of being scheduled like a board meeting. I wanted a partner. You gave me a project plan. I read that note twice and went straight back to my laptop. The Midtown deal was closing the next morning. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because I'd taught myself to compartmentalize everything that wasn't critical. If it wasn't billable, it wasn't real. That was the rule I'd internalized, even though no one said it out loud. Or maybe they did, just in different ways. My father had a line he used often. "Don't make things personal, Ava. It's just business." But it was always personal for me, because I was the one who paid the price when someone else's business decision exploded. I was the one patching holes, rescheduling meetings, rewriting timelines. I gave them everything. My time, my sleep, my silence. And still I was treated like a problem to be managed, not a partner to be respected. I remember one night about 6 months before they cut me off, I was sitting in the corner booth of our 24th floor conference room, half asleep, eating ramen straight from the cup. Ethan walked in all smug and energized, high off some meeting with a developer I knew we shouldn't be doing business with. He slapped a document on the table and said, "Ava, run this through for me, will you? I've got dinner with Monique." I looked at the paper. It was a projected return model full of fantasy math and fake comps. He didn't wait for me to respond. He just left. That's when it started to shift for me. I wasn't just tired, I was done. Done being the quiet one, the fixer, the invisible margin that let everyone else shine. But even then, even when the frustration simmered at the surface, I still hoped desperately that someone would see me. That one of them would sit me down and say, "We know what you've done. We see you. And we're grateful." It never happened. What I got instead was a slow surgical erasure. Meetings I used to lead quietly reassigned, access to key folders revoked without explanation, my input suddenly not aligned with the direction of the company. They didn't just push me out, they made me disappear while I was still standing in the room, and the worst part, I let them, because I thought maybe, just maybe, if I stayed long enough, quiet enough, they'd change their minds. But people don't change their minds when silence works in their favor. The day after they pushed me out, I expected naively that someone in my family would reach out. Not to apologize, maybe not even to explain. Just something human. A call. A knock on my door. Anything that said, "We know you exist." Instead, I got a text from my mother. It was 3 short lines, clean and cold, like an auto-generated message. "Hope you understand. It's for the best. Focus on yourself." That was it. No, I love you. No? Are you okay? No recognition that my entire life had just been deleted with a voicemail. For a second, I stared at the screen, waiting for another message. Maybe that one was just the setup, and something more real was coming. But the typing bubble never appeared. I read it again. And again. Hope you understand. Understand what exactly? That I had given my 20s, my health, my relationships, my entire identity to a company bearing our family name and was discarded like an outdated software update. It's for the best. Best for who? For Ethan, who couldn't run a clean ledger if his life depended on it. For Dad, who couldn't tolerate a daughter who disagreed with him in front of the board. For her, because silence is easier than confrontation. Focus on yourself. I had no idea what that even meant anymore. Myself had been so tightly tied to fixing, producing, proving that I didn't know what remained without all that noise. The woman who texted me wasn't some distant relative or corporate superior. She was my mother. She packed my school lunches. She taught me how to tie my shoes. She once cried when I lost my first tooth. But now, she watched me get erased and said nothing. And suddenly, I understood everything. In our family, you weren't loved unconditionally. You were loved if you aligned, if you obeyed, if you didn't rock the boat. The moment you stepped out of that mold even slightly, you became a liability. And liabilities were neutralized. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent years protecting the Morgan name from external threats. Bad press, failed deals, shady vendors, I handled it all. But in the end, the real threat came from within. From people who were supposed to be my foundation, and I saw it clearly now. I was never part of the family. I was part of the infrastructure. I wasn't grieving the loss of a job. I was grieving the realization that what I thought was love was just utility dressed in polite tones. So I did something that surprised even me. I turned off my phone. I didn't throw it or cry into a pillow or down a bottle of wine. I just powered it off, set it face down on the windowsill, and stood in silence. For the first time in a decade, no one needed me, and that absence at first felt like drowning. Then, strangely, like breathing. There's a grief in realizing that you were never truly seen, but there's also power in naming it. That night, I didn't write a resignation letter or send angry emails. I didn't call anyone to vent. Instead, I opened my laptop, not to destroy them, not yet, but to finally build something with my name on it. That night, when I opened my laptop, my hands hovered over the keyboard like I was entering a foreign space familiar but suddenly new. For years, every time I'd logged in, it had been for them, for a pitch deck, a financial audit, a 3 a.m. crisis Ethan had caused. But this time, there was no boardroom to save, no father to impress, no brother to clean up after. There was just me. And for the first time, that wasn't terrifying. It was exhilarating. I opened a blank folder and named it something simple: rebuild. Not revenge, not destruction, not Morgan, just rebuild. For the next few hours, I poured out every idea I'd been shelving for years. The platform I'd once dreamed of building that used AI to optimize real estate investment decisions. The one Dad laughed off as too techie, too niche. The one Ethan stole parts of for a presentation and butchered so badly I deleted the original file out of pure embarrassment. Now I started again. Clean. A new domain name. A burner email. A cloud server that didn't trace back to Morgan Developments. And I worked. Quietly. Obsessively. Like someone waking up from a long coma with a heartbeat full of purpose. I didn't tell anyone. No friends. No ex-colleagues. Not even my roommate, who assumed I was freelancing or taking a mental health sabbatical, which was a convenient lie I didn't bother correcting. During the day, I took contract jobs consulting for mid-sized commercial firms who couldn't believe someone with my resume was available. At night, I coded, designed, built pitch decks and investor briefings, studied legal protections, learned how to build a startup without family money legacy contacts or the Morgan name. I built with nothing but my experience and my receipts. 14 months passed like that. 14 months of showing up invisible, eating lunch alone, working through weekends, not for someone else's empire but for my own. No press, no spotlight, no recognition. But this time it was by choice. And slowly, silently, it started working. The platform went live in beta. Investors started replying. I closed my first angel round with $800K, led by someone who used to avoid Morgan Developments like the plague because of Dad's reputation. They said to me, "You're the only one I ever trusted in that family." That hit harder than I expected, not because I needed the validation, but because it reminded me I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. I'd been in the right rooms all along, just with the wrong last name. By month 15, I'd signed 3 contracts with commercial developers, one of which had recently rejected my father's firm for lack of transparency. That made me laugh, not because I was being petty, because I finally understood something. Winning doesn't require revenge, it just requires clarity. And clarity was all I had now. They had erased me, and in the space they left behind, I was quietly building something they couldn't touch, something they didn't even know existed. Not yet. By the time month 14 rolled around, I had everything mapped out. My startup, Vera Analytics, wasn't just functioning, it was thriving. We were closing in on 6 figures a month in revenue. I had a full-time CTO, 2 client success managers, and a part-time legal consultant who used to work for one of the top firms in Manhattan. No one on my team had any ties to my family. No one called me kiddo in meetings. And best of all, no one questioned my decisions. For the first time in my life, I was building something that was entirely mine. I was no longer Ava Morgan, the fixer, the assistant, the shadow. I was Ava Morgan, founder and CEO. And no one knew. Not my parents, not Ethan, not anyone from Morgan Developments. I had disappeared so completely from their radar that I was sure they had rewritten history without me, as if I had never existed. And honestly, I preferred it that way. But then one night at exactly 10:38 p.m., my phone lit up. A voicemail, From Ethan. I didn't listen to it right away. I stared at the notification like it was a relic from another life. My hands trembled as I hovered over the screen. Part of me wanted to delete it without ever hitting play. Another part, the part that still remembered the smell of Sunday dinners and the sound of Ethan laughing in the pool when we were kids, told me to listen. So I did. His voice was shaky, unsteady, stripped of its usual smugness. "Ava, I know we haven't talked, but Dad's in trouble. It's bad. The IRS is involved. They're going through everything and they're asking questions about the books, the shell companies, the offshore stuff. We need you. Please, just come to the family meeting. We'll explain everything there." He paused like he expected me to jump in, but of course it was a voicemail. "I know you're angry, but this isn't about the past. This is about protecting the family. You always knew how to fix things. You always—" I hung up before it ended. I sat in silence, the message still echoing in my mind. They needed me. Not because they missed me. Not because they'd had some great epiphany about how wrong they'd been. Not because they'd grown. They needed me because the empire was burning, and I had once been the only one who knew where the fire extinguishers were hidden. I didn't respond that night. I didn't sleep much either. The next morning, I stood in front of my closet, staring at rows of carefully organized outfits I hadn't touched in over a year. Blazers, pencil skirts, the old armor I used to wear when I needed to feel like I belonged in rooms that constantly questioned my right to exist. I pulled out a navy blue suit, tailored, clean, simple, powerful, not flashy, not revenge. Purpose. I pulled my hair into a tight ponytail, no makeup, no earrings, just focus. I didn't go there to scream or slam doors. I didn't go there to gloat. I went to that meeting like a ghost returning from the dead, not to haunt them, but to prove I'd never needed them to begin with. The headquarters hadn't changed. Same glass facade, same receptionist who used to forget my name during investor visits. When I stepped through the elevator doors and walked into the boardroom, they all looked up, stunned, silent, afraid. Dad didn't stand. Mom looked down into her tea like it held answers. Ethan gave me a tight, fake smile, the one he always used when he needed something. I didn't return it. I walked to the end of the long mahogany table, his seat, the one he once told me I'd never deserve. I pulled out the chair and sat down without a word. And just like that, the girl they erased had returned. But not as a daughter, as something far more dangerous. The silence in the boardroom was suffocating. You could hear the hum of the HVAC system, the faint tapping of someone's nervous foot under the table, and the sound of my chair settling into the carpet. No one spoke for a few seconds as if they were waiting for me to explode, but I didn't. I simply folded my hands on the table and waited. Ethan cleared his throat first. "Ava, we've hit a bit of a situation." I raised an eyebrow. "A bit?" He looked down at his notes like they could shield him from my expression. Then Dad spoke. His voice was steadier than Ethan's, but only just. "There's been an audit," he said. "A federal one, IRS. They're going back 7 years. Someone reported discrepancies in our filings. They want full transparency, and they've frozen several of our accounts until we cooperate." I almost laughed. 7 years. That was how long I spent fixing their mistakes, covering their oversights, running double reports, just to make sure no one noticed the holes Ethan kept digging. Now they were drowning in them. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, keeping my tone calm, clinical. Dad didn't answer. Mom finally looked up. Her voice came out in a whisper. "We need help, Ava." There it was. Not an apology, not an admission, just the need. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilt, or sadness, or obligation. I felt clarity. "You need my help," I said slowly, looking around the table at the same people who voted to remove me without so much as a phone call. "You made it very clear I wasn't part of this family, or this company." Ethan leaned forward. "We didn't mean for it to go that way. It was strategic." "Strategic," I repeated like I was tasting the word. "Interesting choice. So is this." They were desperate. I could see it on their faces, in the slumped shoulders, the nervous hands, the way no one could quite meet my eyes for more than a few seconds. Dad broke first. "You know the system better than anyone. The reporting, the compliance, the layers. You designed it. I nodded slowly. That's true. I built it. A hush fell across the room. It wasn't bravado, it wasn't ego, it was just a fact, and they all knew it. I leaned forward. If I'm going to help, there will be conditions. Ethan blinked. Anything. I looked directly at him. I want full access to the books. All of them. Past and present. Nothing redacted. No passwords. No restrictions. Dad's jaw tensed. That's a lot of sensitive data. I gave him a soft smile. Exactly. Mom glanced at Ethan, then at Dad. They exchanged that silent parental language I used to misinterpret as wisdom. Now I saw it for what it was: calculation. But they didn't have a choice. After a long pause, Dad said, "Fine." It was one word, but it shifted everything. It was the first time in my life that my father didn't have leverage over me. "You'll have access by the end of the day," Ethan added, his voice tight. I stood smoothing my blazer. "I'll be in touch once I've reviewed the files." As I turned to leave, Ethan followed. "Ava," he said, lowering his voice, "are you doing this to save us? Or to bury us?" I looked at him for a long second, then said nothing. Because the truth was, I didn't even know yet. I didn't go home after the meeting. I went straight to the office space I leased under my startup's shell company, the one no one from Morgan Developments knew existed. It was small, tucked into the 10th floor of a shared building downtown. No one looked twice when I walked in. Just another young professional with a laptop bag and a face full of purpose. I plugged in my external hard drive and waited for the login credentials Ethan promised. They came through exactly 38 minutes later in a curt email titled, "Access, time sensitive, no greeting, no apology, no pleasantries, just login codes and a link to the Morgan Development's internal archives." I opened it, entered the credentials, and waited. It had been a long time since I'd seen this interface, but nothing had changed. Same layout, same folders, same filing logic I designed years ago when I reorganized their digital infrastructure because the original system was a mess of overlapping PDFs and renamed Word docs. I clicked into the financials first, then the audit reports, then the offshore investments folder, and suddenly it was all clear. It wasn't just that I had disagreed with a shady real estate deal. It wasn't even about me being difficult or too controlling like I'd been told in whispered conversations before they cut me off. It was about proximity. I had gotten too close to the one folder labeled AM Ventures LLC, too close to the string of wire transfers routed through 3 shell corporations, ultimately landing in bank accounts in the Cayman Islands. Too close to seeing that Ethan had been skimming profits for years. Not Dad, not the board, not even some junior accountant. Ethan. Every time I ran a report, fixed a gap, or cleaned up one of his numbers, I had unknowingly moved pieces to keep his secret safe. And then, sometime in the final year before I was pushed out, I noticed something that didn't quite line up. One of the holding companies wasn't matching up with a project I had worked on. I flagged it in a private memo. A memo that I now realized was accessed by Ethan 2 days before my access was revoked. He didn't just sabotage me, he eliminated a threat. He made sure I looked difficult, insubordinate, disloyal, all easy labels to stick on a woman in a male-dominated legacy company. Dad bought it. Or maybe he wanted to believe it. Mom didn't ask questions. She never did. I sat back in my chair, letting the weight of it all sink in. I wasn't cut out because I challenged a deal. I was cut out because I was dangerous to the wrong person, and that person wasn't my father. It was my brother. And now the same brother who once used my spreadsheets to pass finance exams in college was on the brink of watching everything he'd stolen collapse on top of him. I clicked Download All and copied every single file into a private folder on my encrypted drive. Then I made 2 more folders. One titled Insurance, the other Rebuild. Because now I had a choice. I could fix this mess for free like I always did and disappear again. Or I could own what I cleaned, and this time they'd have to pay for it, not with money, with control. The next morning, I didn't open the files to fix anything. I opened them to leverage everything. I started with the oldest records, the ones no one ever bothered to scrub. Ethan wasn't just sloppy, he was arrogant. He assumed I'd never look again, that I'd stayed deleted like they intended, but I remembered everything, every deal, every number that didn't sit right. Every time he asked me to just run this through real quick with that lazy confidence he wore like cologne. Now I had the time and the reason to trace it all. By noon, I had mapped out a full timeline of Ethan's siphoning strategy. He didn't just skim off profits, he used my name to do it. That LLCAM Ventures, it was no accident. It was designed to look like a Morgan subsidiary, but the initials, they weren't for asset management. They were me, Ava Morgan. He registered it through a third-party firm with layers of obfuscation, likely planning to pin everything on me if it ever came to light. It was smart, terrifyingly smart, and now it was my best weapon. But I wasn't going to the authorities. Not yet. I had a bigger move in mind. At 3:14 p.m., I opened a second window and finalized a document I'd been sitting on for weeks, a formal acquisition offer. I submitted it through a competitor firm I quietly backed months ago, Vera Holdings East, an entity completely detached from my personal identity, but fueled entirely by my funding and data. The offer was for 2 of Morgan Development's prime commercial assets properties they couldn't afford to lose. I submitted it at half market value because I knew they were desperate. They'd take it. I even attached investor agreements signed, sealed, bulletproof. I didn't need Dad's approval. I didn't need a board vote. I had legally outmaneuvered them before they even realized I was back on the chessboard. A few hours later, my phone rang. Blocked number. I let it go to voicemail. When I finally listened, Ethan's voice was unraveling. "They're freezing accounts, Ava. The audit team, they're asking about Vera Holdings East. They think you're involved. Are you? Is that you? Please tell me that's not you." I didn't respond. Not because I wanted him to spiral, but because silence had finally become my power. For years, I'd been the one explaining, justifying, diffusing tension in rooms filled with men who thought my calm meant weakness. Now that same calm was swallowing them whole. 10 minutes later, another voicemail. Ethan again, this time barely holding it together. "They're saying Vera Holdings just submitted a buyout offer for the Fifth Avenue building. The same building Dad used as collateral. You can't do this. This is our family. You don't destroy your own family." That was the moment I picked up the phone. I didn't yell. I didn't explain. I just said, "You destroyed this family the day you used mine to cover your fraud." He was silent. Then he whispered, "I never thought you had this in you." I smiled. "That's because you never bothered to look past yourself." Then I hung up. I had spent my entire life being underestimated, overlooked, and overwritten. But now they were learning the hard way the quiet ones aren't weak. They're strategic. The morning I returned to Morgan Developments, the sky was overcast, fitting, really. 14 months ago, I walked out of this building stripped of my title, my purpose, and my place in a family I thought I'd belong to. This time, I wasn't walking in as a daughter or a subordinate. I was walking in as the new majority stakeholder, not through inheritance, not through forgiveness, through strategy, precision, silence. I didn't wear revenge. I wore power, a fitted navy suit, no jewelry, hair slicked into a clean ponytail, no need for makeup. I didn't come to impress anyone. I came to take over. My driver pulled up in front of the main entrance. A sleek black sedan, quiet luxury, nothing flashy. The gold initials on the side door read VHE, Vera Holdings East, the very firm they thought was their competitor, the very firm they'd soon be answering to. I stepped out and walked through the glass doors without hesitation. The receptionist, Kelly, if I remembered right, froze mid-sentence when she saw me, her voice caught in her throat. Ms. Morgan, are you here for a meeting with—" "No," I said calmly, sliding a folder across the desk. "I'm here about Mr. Carter." She opened it with trembling fingers, eyes widening as she scanned the acquisition paperwork and investor sign-offs. Her mouth opened slightly, but I was already walking toward the boardroom. The same boardroom, the same table, the same faces that voted me out. They were all there, Dad at the head of the table, red-faced and stiff. Ethan slumped in his seat like he hadn't slept in days. Mom sat off to the side, avoiding my eyes like the floor was suddenly more interesting. I dropped the official buyout folder on the table, letting the heavy silence do the talking. "You have 48 hours to vacate the properties listed on page 2, I said evenly. "The remaining assets, if not contested, will be transferred to Vera Holdings East." Dad's voice cracked. "You're bluffing." I didn't flinch. I simply slid the signed investor agreements across the table. "Try me." Ethan stood up so fast his chair screeched. "You wouldn't do this." I turned to face him. "You made me family when it was convenient. You made me competition the day you pushed me out." His fists clenched. "You'll regret this." I smiled faintly. "I already did. Every night I cried myself to sleep thinking I'd lost everything, but now I see it clearly." I stepped toward the door, looking back only once. "You didn't take anything from me. You freed me." And I walked out not with anger, not with tears, not with vengeance, but with the peace of a woman who rebuilt her kingdom from the bricks they threw at her. Outside, my driver opened the car door. The initials on the door gleamed beneath the gray sky: AMH Ava Morgan Holdings. Not Morgan Developments. Not a family name passed down, a legacy I built alone. And this was only the beginning. The takeover was clean, legally airtight, publicly quiet, emotionally messier than I expected. The moment I walked out of that boardroom, it hit me like a second wave. This wasn't just about Ethan or my father anymore. It wasn't just about the business. It was about years of systems designed to protect men like them, people who weaponized loyalty, who rewarded compliance and punished competence when it came from the wrong voice. I sat alone that night in my apartment, the same one-bedroom space where I'd once cried on the floor after getting cut out. But I wasn't crying now. I was scrolling through documents, hundreds of them: contracts, side deals, ghost vendors, offshore transfers. Each file I opened didn't just confirm what I already knew, it deepened it. There weren't just a few red flags. There were entire patterns of deceit, some subtle, some blatant. Most of them centered around one constant: Ethan's name. But what chilled me most wasn't how much he stole. It was how confidently he had built the trap around me. One folder labeled Legacy Holdings with a quiet subfolder marked AM. Ventures contained years of transfers linked to shell companies, each tied to projects I had once managed. It looked legitimate at first glance. The names matched old site locations. The dates coincided with projects I'd handled. The structure suggested these were my deals. If I hadn't known every detail of those projects, if I hadn't personally corrected Ethan's errors on most of them, I might have believed the narrative myself. That's when it hit me. They hadn't just erased me. They'd prepared a fallback story where I was the villain. If the investigation had hit sooner, if I hadn't quietly built my own company, if I had tried to make peace and come back under their terms, they might have framed me to save themselves. It wasn't just betrayal. It was strategy. My entire exit, engineered to be clean and final, had nothing to do with a disagreement over ethics. They hadn't been afraid I'd challenge them. They were afraid I'd expose them. And they were right. Because now, with every document I cross-referenced and downloaded, the picture sharpened. Ethan hadn't just skimmed. He'd siphoned millions through fake contractors and inflated invoices. At least 3 real estate developments had dual ledgers, the public one for investors and the real one for profit laundering. And every one of them passed through hands I used to trust. I should have felt rage or revenge. But what I felt most was clarity. This wasn't personal anymore. It was math, cause and effect, choice and consequence. I clicked download all on the last batch of files and copied them into 2 folders on my encrypted drive. One was still called insurance, the other options, because now the question wasn't whether I could destroy them. It was how and when I wanted to. The next day, I booked a private meeting room at a law firm I'd never used before. I didn't go to anyone from the old guard, no legacy attorneys who once handled Morgan Development's contracts or smiled too wide at family galas. I needed someone clean, sharp, unimpressed by money and immune to intimidation. Enter Harper Lynn, a 30-something Harvard law graduate with a background in corporate fraud litigation and a reputation for precision so ruthless she was once nicknamed the Scalpel. She didn't offer small talk. She reviewed the files I brought like a surgeon prepping for operation. "These transfers were designed to frame you," she said, sliding her laptop across so I could see a chain of internal email tags linking my initials to transactions I never authorized. They were setting up a fall guy. I nodded. I figured that part out. She tilted her head. "You're remarkably calm for someone who was nearly sent to prison without knowing it. I've had 14 months to practice." She gave a small, approving smile. We spent the next 2 hours organizing my defense file, building a digital wall around every move I'd made from the dates I left the company to the timestamps on backup reports that proved Ethan had accessed my private folders. It was more than enough to clear my name. But I wasn't just interested in clearing anything. I was interested in control. When we finished, Harper leaned back and asked the question I'd been expecting. "So, do you want to report this?" I paused, fingers resting against the sleek table. "I want options," I said. "Leverage. I don't want to burn them to the ground." "Not yet, but I want them to know I can, at any moment." Harper raised a brow. "You're not playing to win. You're playing to own the board." "Exactly." She sat forward, her voice low and even. "Then we move carefully. We encrypt everything. We draft a statement for regulators, but don't file it unless they force your hand. You keep your stake, you keep your distance, and you let them sweat." I nodded. Perfect. By the time I left her office, I felt different. Not angry, not victorious. Just aligned. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about holding the line my line. For so long, I'd been the one cleaning up messes I didn't make, swallowing shame that wasn't mine. Now I was the one holding the match and deciding not to strike it just yet. That evening, I got another message from Ethan. This time, an email with the subject line, "Let's talk," privately. I didn't open it. He didn't deserve the courtesy of a read receipt. They knew I had access. They knew I'd seen enough to ruin them. But what they didn't know, what they would never understand, was that power isn't about destruction. It's about freedom. And for the first time in my life, I finally had both. 3 days after my meeting with Harper, the article dropped. Front page of Commercial Property Digest. Bold headline, stark font. Former exec returns as CEO of rival firm quietly acquires key Morgan assets. My photo wasn't on it. Just a sleek image of the 2 buildings I had recently acquired, the same ones my father once called untouchable legacy anchors. Now they were mine. The article didn't reveal how. It didn't name me directly, but anyone who had ever been in a Morgan boardroom knew the subtext. Within hours, my phone buzzed with a flood of texts, LinkedIn messages, and veiled congratulations from former employees, mid-tier investors, even people who once actively ignored me at conferences. "Congrats, Ms. Morgan. Looks like things came full circle. Brilliant move, subtle but savage. Knew you were the real backbone of that company." I didn't reply to any of them. I didn't need to, because the narrative was shifting without me lifting a finger. No tell-all interview, no televised exposé, just facts and silence silence, when paired with truth, becomes deafening. A few hours later, my assistant forwarded a media request from a reporter at the Wall Street Ledger. Would Ava Morgan be willing to comment on her recent acquisitions and the future of Vera Holdings? I had my reply ready in 5 words. No comment at this time. They published the story anyway. And just like that, my name started circulating in the same circles that once refused to invite me in. Not as Charles Morgan's daughter, not as Ethan's fixer, as Ava Morgan's CEO. The one they never saw coming. By the end of the week, 2 more things happened. First, 3 former Morgan Developments employees reached out discreetly but purposefully inquiring about positions at Vera Holdings. High-level people. Smart, ethical, people who had seen the cracks before the collapse but were too afraid to speak up. Second, a Morgan family board member, the same one who had voted against me during my exit, scheduled a private lunch request to discuss potential collaboration. I declined. I wasn't interested in revisiting burnt bridges. I was building my own roads now. What struck me most wasn't how fast the narrative changed, it was how easy it was to take control once I stopped asking for permission. For so long, I'd been playing defense, cleaning up, stepping aside, making room, and they fed on that. on my silence, my restraint. But now I was still silent. I was still restrained. But this time it was by choice. Because silence is louder when people expect you to speak, and power is sharper when you don't have to swing it. The text came late on a Thursday night. It was from an unknown number, short, measured, familiar in tone. "Your father isn't well. We saw the article. Everything is falling apart. We didn't know it would end like this. No name attached. But I didn't need one. I knew it was my mother." I stared at the screen for a long time. The light from it dimmed as my phone began to time out, but I tapped it again and again, like maybe if I just looked long enough I'd feel something. But I didn't. Not anger, not sadness, not even satisfaction. Just stillness. There was a time when a message like that would have undone me. I would have rushed over, called back, offered some carefully phrased reassurance to smooth things over like I always did, because that's what daughters do, right? Even the ones who are cut out. But I wasn't their daughter anymore, not in the way they had defined it. I was a placeholder they had used until I became inconvenient, until I started asking questions, until I stopped nodding. And now, when it was all falling apart, they remembered me again. Not for who I was, not for what they'd done, but for what I could still fix. I put the phone down on the edge of my coffee table and looked out the window. The skyline shimmered indifferent and perfect. Somewhere across the city, my former family sat in their silent panic trying to reverse engineer the damage I hadn't even begun to unleash. But I wasn't interested in vengeance anymore. That text wasn't a trap. It wasn't a ploy. It was a mirror, a reminder that I'd spent most of my life mistaking proximity for love, thinking silence was protection, believing that if I worked hard enough, stayed loyal enough, maybe, just maybe, I'd finally earn what should have been freely given. But love doesn't arrive after the empire falls, and apologies don't come through anonymous numbers. That message. It wasn't a white flag, it was an echo. Too late, too thin, too empty. I opened my phone again and hovered over the keyboard. Then I did what they had never expected. Nothing. I didn't reply. I didn't explain. I didn't extend mercy where none had ever been offered to me. Because sometimes the strongest move isn't to slam the door shut, it's to leave it open and simply choose not to walk through it. I closed my phone, set it face down again, and turned back to my laptop. I had an event to plan, a launch, a beginning. Not for revenge, for legacy, for me. 2 weeks after the buyout was finalized, I walked through the halls of what used to be Morgan Development's headquarters, not as an employee, not as a daughter, but as its new owner. The brass plaque with my father's name on the glass wall had been removed. Quietly, without fanfare, just a silent shift in authority. I didn't announce the change. I didn't post about it. No dramatic press conference. No champagne in the boardroom. I just showed up one morning and everything was different. Because I was. I didn't take his old office. I left it untouched. Instead, I converted the largest conference room, the one where they'd once voted me out, into a multi-purpose space. Glass walls, clean design, fresh light. I had it renamed the Rebuild Room. A subtle gesture, but one I would never need to explain. The ones who understood, understood, and those who didn't. They were no longer in the building. The first few days were strange. Staff avoided eye contact, unsure how to address me. Some were clearly nervous, especially those who had been complicit in my erasure, even passively. I didn't hold grudges, but I also didn't pretend to forget. I didn't return cruelty for cruelty. I returned clarity for cowardice. On day 4, Ethan showed up. He didn't make an appointment, just walked in past reception like he used to. Security stopped him at the elevator. My assistant asked if I wanted to see him. I told her no, not out of pettiness, but because that door had closed, permanently. A week later, I received a formal request from legal signed by my father, asking for a short extension on vacating the last Morgan-leased property. I granted it. 72 hours. That was me being generous, not forgiving. Just finished. Because when you've truly let go of someone's control over you, there's no need to prove anything to them anymore. You simply move on. The team at Vera Holdings had grown in the meantime. More former employees from Morgan quietly joined people I had worked with, respected, even protected at times. They came not because I invited them, but because they saw something in the silence I left behind. A message that it was possible to walk away and not look back, that it was possible to survive being erased and rebuild anyway. In private moments, I still thought about my mother's text. I hadn't blocked the number. I hadn't deleted it either. But I never responded. Because there are some wounds that don't get stitched up with a conversation. They heal in solitude, with time, with distance, and I was giving myself all three. One morning I walked past the mirror in the executive hallway, the one I used to avoid, because I couldn't stand the way I looked when I was pretending to belong. This time I stopped, really looked. And what I saw wasn't a woman scorned or bitter or fueled by rage. I saw someone still, someone sovereign, someone no longer in orbit around other people's egos. I smiled, just a little. Then I turned and walked into my new life quietly, powerfully, and without hesitation, because the storm had passed, and I had made it through. I used to think survival was the goal, just getting through the day, just proving I could stand on my own after everything they took from me. But once I survived, once I bought back the buildings they said I wasn't good enough to manage, once I sat at the head of the table they tried to keep me from, I realized survival wasn't enough. I didn't want to just exist. I wanted to build. Not buildings, not empires, not the kind they worshipped. I wanted to build something that mattered. That seed had been growing quietly for months, even before the takeover, even before the files, the evidence, the truth. Back when I was eating ramen at midnight in my shoebox apartment, coding alone, and wondering if anyone would ever take me seriously again. I had an idea then, just a whisper, really. What if I could make sure no one else had to go through what I did? What if there was a space for women who were pushed out, overlooked, underestimated, not because they weren't capable, but because they were inconvenient, not compliant enough, not quiet enough, not willing to play nice with broken systems. And now with Vera holding stable, the timing felt right. I called it the Rebuild Initiative, a nonprofit arm focused on providing mentorship, legal support, and seed funding for women in business who'd been silenced or shut out of male-dominated industries. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud, but it was real. And most importantly, it wasn't about me. It was about creating the kind of support system I wish I'd had when I was sitting alone on the other side of that voicemail. I staffed the program with people who understood the mission, former CFOs, lawyers, startup founders, investors who knew the difference between talent and noise. We didn't offer handouts. We offered oxygen for women whose fires were still burning beneath the ashes of being dismissed. I spent nights building the website myself, days reviewing candidate profiles, quiet weekends interviewing applicants from all over the country, women who had been forced out of family businesses, cut from startups they helped build, erased from boardrooms because someone with a bigger title felt threatened. And every time I heard a story that echoed mine, I felt something crack and reset inside me. Not in pain, in purpose. One applicant stood out. Her name was Talia, 29. Former COO of a tech firm founded by her ex-fiancé. She built the infrastructure, designed the operating systems, recruited the first 20 employees. And the second she caught wind of a tax evasion scheme and raised concerns, they locked her out of her own accounts, froze her shares, and spun a story about mental instability to the press. When she finished telling me her story, she looked down and said, "I don't want revenge. I just want to be seen again." I almost couldn't speak, because I remembered saying the exact same thing to myself once. We accepted her into the program that afternoon. 3 weeks later, she closed her first funding round. And I watched it all happen from the background, not as the star, not as the savior, but as the proof. That rebuilding is possible, that silence can be sacred, that power doesn't have to look like domination, it can look like healing, like offering a seat at a better table. One you built yourself. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't carrying weight anymore. I was planting roots. The night of the Rebuild Initiative launch event, I stood behind the curtain, looking out at the crowd through a narrow slit. Investors, mentors, founders, people who believed in the mission before it had a name, People who believed in me not because of my last name or my silence or what I could fix for them, but for what I was building. The room buzzed with quiet energy. It didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like a beginning. When they called my name, I stepped onto the small stage in a simple black suit. No spotlight, no dramatic music, just a podium and a room full of people who knew what it meant to be underestimated. I paused for a breath. Then I said I was once told I didn't belong at the table, so I built a bigger one. The applause wasn't loud, but it was deep, rooted, earned. Later that night, as guests began to mingle and music hummed softly through the space, I stepped out to the hallway for a moment of quiet. That's when I saw him. Ethan. He looked thinner, paler, like the weight of everything had finally caught up to him. "I'm not here to cause a scene," he said quickly. I didn't know you had this in you." I looked him in the eye, really looked. "That's because you never bothered to." He nodded slowly. "You won." I didn't flinch. "No, Ethan. I survived. You watched." And then I turned and walked back into the room. Because this story was no longer about proving him wrong. It was about building something right, something that couldn't be taken away with a voicemail or a board vote, something that belonged to me. Completely. The morning after the launch, I woke up before my alarm. No urgent emails, no crisis meetings, no missed calls. Just stillness. I stood by the window watching the early light break over the skyline. The city looked the same. But I didn't. For so long I'd been running, trying to earn, to prove, to repair. But standing there barefoot on the cold floor of a space I finally owned, I realized something I never thought I'd feel again. Peace. Not the kind that comes from winning or being right or taking back power. This was deeper. The kind that comes from knowing you no longer need anyone's permission to exist. I brewed my coffee, checked my calendar, and saw a meeting request from a new investor, a quiet one, someone with a reputation for backing purpose-driven ventures, the kind of connection I used to chase. Now they were coming to me, and not because I was someone's daughter, because I was me. As I prepped for the meeting, I noticed something on my desk drawer, an old flash drive I hadn't touched since the day I downloaded the Morgan files. For a moment, my fingers hovered over it, not out of anger, out of gratitude. That tiny device once held my entire safety net. Now I didn't need it. The insurance had become irrelevant. The power it held was real but unnecessary, because the life I was living now didn't depend on leverage or exposure. It was mine either way. I slipped it into a drawer, shut it, and moved on. That afternoon, I walked into the Vera Holdings headquarters, sunlight pouring through the atrium, a buzz of quiet activity in every corner. People building, people creating, people who had once been silenced, now leading. I wasn't their boss. I was their founder. And the difference mattered. As I made my way down the hall, one of our program participants passed me with a confident nod. She didn't stop me. She didn't fawn. She just walked with purpose. It struck me then, this is what real legacy looks like. Not buildings named after you, not headlines, not revenge, momentum. That evening I got a text. No unknown number this time, it was her. "We saw the article. Your father isn't doing well." We didn't know it would end like this. No greeting, no question. Just a message soaked in regret that arrived far too late. I stared at it, waiting for something to rise in me, grief, anger, guilt. But there was nothing. Not numbness, not coldness, just nothing. And for the first time I understood what real peace feels like. Not the kind you fight for. The kind that happens when you finally stop needing anything from people who were never capable of giving it. I didn't text back, because this wasn't silence out of punishment. It was silence out of clarity. There was nothing left to explain, nothing left to fix. She had made her choice again and again, not with words but with silence. Just like I was doing now. Only difference was my silence was healing. Hers was a shield, and maybe one day she'd realize the cost of that kind of armor, the kind that protects comfort while it wounds the people who love you. But that wasn't mine to carry anymore. I closed my phone and placed it face down on the counter. Then I poured myself a glass of water, stepped outside onto the balcony, and let the night air wash over me. Down below, the city kept moving. Lights flickered in buildings I didn't own, in rooms I'd never step into. And it didn't matter, because I had finally stepped into my own life. One not defined by inheritance or apology or some desperate need to be understood by people who only saw what I could do, not who I was. And in that moment, I didn't feel powerful. I felt free. I still have the voicemail, the one my father left me, the one that started all of this. You're out of Morgan Developments. Don't call back. It's saved on an old backup drive tucked in a drawer I rarely open. Not because I need to hear it again. I don't. Not because I'm holding on to resentment, I'm not. I keep it as a reminder, not of pain, of clarity. Because that moment, the one that broke me, humiliated me, and hollowed me out, was also the moment I was reborn. When I replied, understood, I wasn't just accepting the loss. I was writing the first line of my new life. And that life has nothing to do with revenge. It's not about taking back what was stolen or proving anyone wrong. It's about building something no one can take from you. Because here's the truth I learned. You don't need a seat at their table. You can build your own. And when you do, it doesn't need to be bigger or louder or grander. It just needs to be yours. Mine started in a tiny apartment with a secondhand laptop and a heart full of hurt. And now it's grown into something I never imagined. Not just a company, not just an initiative, but a movement, a space for women who've been erased, silenced, or labeled too much, too opinionated, too emotional, too ambitious, too real. I built the Rebuild Initiative for them, for the ones who sat in meetings afraid to speak, for the ones whose names were stripped from their own work, for the daughters who gave everything to a family that only remembered them when it was convenient. If that's you, I want you to hear me clearly. You are not broken, you are not too much, and you are not alone. Your worth doesn't disappear because someone else couldn't see it. Their denial is not your identity. You don't have to burn it all down to find peace. You just have to stop waiting for someone else to hand it to you. Walk away if you must. Start over if you need to. But do it for you, not to be seen, but because you finally see yourself. That's the real win. Not the buyout, not the title, not the applause. The win is waking up and no longer questioning whether you deserve the life you're living, because you built it, brick by brick, in silence, in pain, in power. And if this story meant something to you, if you've ever been cast aside, overlooked, or made to believe your voice didn't matter, I want you to do one thing. Don't disappear. Don't shrink to fit their comfort. Don't silence yourself to survive. Stand, speak, rebuild. And if you're ready, there's a seat waiting for you at our table. We saved it just for you. Sometimes being erased is the best thing that can happen to you because it gives you the chance to rebuild something entirely your own. If you've ever been pushed aside, overlooked, or underestimated, don't disappear. Rebuild. Speak your truth. And find your people. Start today. Your legacy starts the moment you stop asking for permission.